watching the mystical green beanie.
Hey, what's going on, dudes and dudettes? I am the mystical green beanie, and welcome to part 2 of my Ultimate Spider-Man Mega review. Now, as I've said, I'm splitting my review for Volume 2 into 2 parts. There's a lot of 2s there, and the reason for that being is because the second half of Volume 2 more or less slams the brakes on everything, and we just get into all of the Death of Ultimate Spider-Man stuff. Okay, so much like in my review for Volume 1, I feel like I have to provide some context for what's going on in the universe, because while this book doesn't directly deal with the problems in the greater Marvel Universe, or the greater Marvel Ultimate Universe, the characters still feel the ripple effects. So, Volume 2 takes place a few months after Ultimatum. Now, as I briefly mentioned in Volume 1, the basic premise of Ultimatum was that Magneto went crazy and flooded Manhattan, and the status quo for the entire Ultimate Universe was shaken up. The Fantastic Four broke up after the death of Sue and Johnny Storm's father, the X-Men broke up after, well, most of the X-Men were killed off, and chief among them being Professor X, Magneto, and Cyclops. Also, it literally became illegal to be a mutant in the United States of America, and people who were discovered to be mutants were either shot on sight or thrown in a concentration camp. And this is basically the United States government's reaction to Magneto's terrorist attack. And that's where the Ultimate Universe is at this moment, and that's where this volume is taking place. So, a few months after the Ultimatum event, the Daily Bugle has had massive layoffs, and Peter was one of them. So now he's working in a fast food restaurant in the mall. On the flip side, even though Peter's civilian life kinda sucks, his Spider-Man career has really taken off. Because before Ultimatum, New York was 50-50 on Spider-Man. Half of the city loved him, while the other half hated him for whatever reason, whether they thought he was a mutant, or just some genetic freak who was trying to get his 15 minutes of fame. But they just hated him, and unfortunately, the people who hated him were the most vocal. And it didn't really help that Peter didn't have good PR, or any PR. But as I mentioned in my review for Volume 1, everybody, including J. Jonah Jameson, witnessed Spider-Man risking his life and swimming through the polluted, bloody, corpse-filled water and navigating through buildings that were just seconds away from collapse, just trying to save as many people as he possibly could. And this completely changed the relationship that New York had with Spider-Man. He's no longer viewed by the people of New York as this punk kid who has more power than he deserves. Instead, he's adored and loved and praised. And the cynic in me wants to say that this is only because, as I mentioned in previous videos about the Ultimate Universe, people are sheep who are easily swayed. Not entirely unlike people in the real world, but I genuinely feel like the people of New York saw this kid doing more than any of them could ever imagine themselves trying to do, and they were won over. And now they see Spider-Man as the hero that he's always been. He's the guy on the streets just trying to look after the people in his city. Anyways, that's where we are at the beginning of the first issue. Then as we progress, we find out that a lot has happened over the course of the past few months in Peter's life. He and MJ apparently had a massive breakup, but unlike any of their previous breakups in the series, this was big. And what made it worse is that it's heavily implied that Gwen took advantage of the situation, and immediately after he broke up with MJ, he started dating Gwen, who, by the way, still lives under the same roof as Peter. So, there is a lot of drama in this volume. And that's kind of what I liked, but also disliked about this volume. Because while I do really like relationship drama in teen-focused superhero comics, it gets kind of tumblery. And I know I said that about the first volume and how Bendis gets a little fanfiction-y here and there, but he has that problem a little more here than he did before. And again, nowhere near as bad as it is during his run on All New X-Men or Iron Man, but you still feel it. And it can be a bit much at some points. And I remember one day I was reading through the first trade in this volume during one of my classes, which, by the way, I have no idea how I graduated high school on time. Literally all I did was read comics and skateboard, but that's besides the point. I remember reading through the first trade and thinking to myself, this isn't how teenagers interact with each other. This isn't how normal people talk. But I guess the counter argument to that is that these aren't normal teenagers. And I kind of like how Bendis touches on this in the third story arc. And this is where we get the ultimate chameleon. So basically in this story we see how they steal Peter's identity and really don't know what to make of Peter's home life. And it's really funny because once the chameleon gets to Peter's house, Gwen starts trying to make out with him, and his immediate reaction is, oh my god, this weirdo is banging his sister. And with that said, I guess now is a good time to actually talk about the villains. As I was just talking about, the Ultimate Universe version of the Chameleon shows up in the third trade, and this is a very inconsequential villain. They don't really do much that hasn't already been done in Ultimate Spider-Man before. In this universe, there are two Chameleons, they're a brother-sister crime duo, and they basically just do what that random guy who killed Gwen Stacy's dad did, where they dress up as Spider-Man and they start robbing banks. I mean, he also wrecks Peter's home life for all but 3 issues. He makes out with MJ in front of Gwen, and that's about it, actually. In fact, the Ultimate Chameleon kind of improves on Peter's life, because they reveal to Jameson that Peter and Spider-Man are the same person, and Jameson vows to do whatever he can to help Peter out, and they're also the cause for Peter and MJ getting back together. So, come to think of it, the Chameleons were just plot devices. And really, the supervillains in this volume are kind of weak. Later on, when we get into all of the Death of Spider-Man stuff, Bendis brings back the Sinister Six, but we'll get there when we get there. The only other supervillains in this volume are Bombshell, who is this volume's version of the Shocker, where she's a jobber. She's the villain whose sole purpose is to get beat up, and later on she becomes a good guy. And the other is Mysterio, who I really liked, but he doesn't really do much here. He kills the Kingpin and he tries to take his place, and then we see more of him in the Death of Ultimate Spider-Man, but most of what he does in these first 15 issues is set up for what he does later on. I'll say this though, this is probably the grittiest version of Mysterio that I've ever seen, and I would love to see this version of Mysterio show up in the movies, but that's whatever. But honestly, the real villain of this volume is the United States political system, and we see how the fallout of Ultimatum really affects the people in Peter's life. And I guess that this is a nice place to talk about how Ultimatum really affected this book, because as I mentioned, after Ultimatum, the Fantastic Four broke up, the surviving X-Men were disbanded, and the mutants were being rounded up and thrown into concentration camps. And because of all of this, Johnny Storm runs away from home and goes to live with Peter Parker. Kitty Pryde hides Iceman in her room for a few days before her mother finds out, and then Kitty decides that it would be a good idea for him to live with Peter instead. And Kitty becomes a vigilante in her own right, and she becomes the Ultimate Universe version of S.H.I.E.L.D. And we see most of this come to a head when one of the students reports Kitty to the FBI, and they show up to the school flashing their badges and pulling their guns on other students, and this forces Kitty to go on the run. And later on, reporters swarm her mother's house, and Kitty goes insane and starts blowing up cars and screaming at reporters. And there's this really sad superpowered battle between Iceman, Human Torch, Spider-Man, and Kitty, because we got to see them all develop a type of family relationship with each other, and now it's all been flushed down the drain. And we kind of see that literally as the fight ends in the sewers. And I already talked about Peter and MJ having a massive breakup, and then there being this weird, uncomfortable love triangle between him, Gwen, and MJ. Now, as for the art, it's really different. Previously, in my review for Volume 1, I pointed out that Dave LaFuenta is the main artist on this volume, and I absolutely love his art. It really fits with the tone that Bendis was developing for the book. Takeshi Miyazawa does an issue, and it's good, but by this point in time, I'm too married to LaFuenta's art style that even though it's similar, it's not what I want. And Sarah Pacelli does issue 15, which is cool, but it's nowhere near as good as her art on the Miles Morales series. But yeah, that's about it. Wait. No, it's not. There's a storyline where we see Rick Jones, because he shows up and he turns into this universe's version of Nova. I just thought I should mention that. But yeah, that's it. The rest of this volume is just Death of Ultimate Spider-Man stuff, and we will get there when we get there. All in all, the first half of Volume 2 is alright. It's not great. It's still a fun ride, but it feels like Bendis kind of slams the brakes on some of the plot lines in this volume to make way for Miles Morales. But I'll get there when I get there. Anyways, what are your thoughts on the first half of Volume 2? Let me know down below in them comments. Also, if you like this video, hit the like button, share, support the channel, and if you want to see more content like this, all you have to do is subscribe. I'm the Mystical Green Beanie, thank you for watching, and as always, until next time, adios nachos, adios.
Charged up.